You know, you go through life and you think, well, I don't have cancer and I'm not sick, so I don't really too worried. We used to think that exposure to pollutants was, you know, that most of our health problems was inherited or genetic, and that the only types of exposures we really need to worry about were things like cigarette smoke and cancer. What recent research has found is that between 70 to 90% of all human disease, and that's just regular illness or, you know, chronic or fatal disease, is related to environmental exposures, things that we're exposed to in our everyday lives. And you know, I really got interested in this topic because I was looking at children coming from chemotherapy and thinking, you know, why do children have cancer? They're too young to have lifestyles. They don't smoke and drink. And then starting to realize that kind of this widespread epidemic of cancer and autism and asthma might be related to what we're exposed to. I should say too that in trying to separate whether it's environment or whether it's inherited, actually the environment can cause genetic damage that's then inherited, so it's very difficult to separate out the two. So enter the field of exposure assessment, and I got involved in this area about 20 years ago, and I actually wrote a textbook together with two colleagues at Stanford from the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, traditionally when we think about pollutants and exposure, what we look at is like a source, like a tailpipe or a smokestack, and then we measure what's coming out of it until it may reach some human or some environmental source. Now, exposure assessment is a new paradigm and it's complementary. So instead of looking at the source, it looks at the receptor, which is humans, and trying to figure out what we're being exposed to and where we're being exposed to it from. And the way we do this is by several ways. One is by wearing little personal exposure monitors on our bodies and measuring the pollutants that reach us. Another way is through biomonitoring, so taking samples of our blood, body fluids, and hair to find out what we're being exposed to. Another way is by sampling what's in our immediate environment to see what might be getting into our bodies. And I should mention that exposure can happen in many routes. It's through inhalation, breathing, but also through epidermal exposure on your skin, that your skin is not an impermeable barrier, and also through ingestion. And it also occurs intergenerationally, so what you're exposed to can affect your children. Another little point here is looking about children and disease is that in the United States, I would say I'm very happily in Australia now. I've been trying to get rid of this American accent, but I have no plans to go back. But in newborn babies in America, there was a study done that they have on average 200 industrial chemicals in their blood when they're born, petrochemicals. You know, so that's an example of intergenerational or in vitro exposure. So we have 2 decades of these exposure analysis studies, and what have we found? Well, it kind of upended our whole view of toxicology and pollutant exposure. One was fairly well known, that we're regularly exposed to a variety of chemicals, and we typically carry a couple hundred of them in our body. And they reside in our fat cells and in our bloodstream. However, the sources of these pollutants are not from the sources typically thought of as the big hazardous sites. They're not from hazardous waste sites. They're not from smokestacks. You know, in general, since there's been smoking banned indoors, it's not from cigarette smoke. So the question is, you know, what are these big bad sources of pollutant exposure that humans are being exposed to now? So the main sources are indoor environments, the places that we think are safe. So our homes, our workplaces, our schools, daycare centers, hospitals, and the products inside those environments. And I'm going to look at all of these in turn. So consumer products, and you're probably looking at this list and go, that's basically everything that we have in our house. I'll talk about a couple of them. So one are pesticides, whether we call them pesticides or herbicides, insecticides, rodenticides, multicides, fungicides. Basically, they're designed to kill, and they also have effects on the human body. Air fresheners, contrary to the nice name, they actually impair air quality rather than improve air quality. They add a chemical mixture to the air and don't really disinfect the air. Hand sanitizers, I'm going to be doing a piece with Channel 9 next week on the hidden dangers in hand sanitizers. It turns out they can actually lead to antibiotic resistance. They create these super strains of bacteria that are not resistant to antibiotics. they're not affected by antibiotics, but they also could increase viral infections. There's been some meta-analyses done showing they actually increase the risk of the flu virus. Also, there's been studies of hand sanitizers and agricultural workers. It turns out that farmers who use hand sanitizers have several hundred degree levels higher of pesticides in their body, because what happens, the hand sanitizer breaks down the natural barriers in the skin. So that's a whole other topic we won't get into today. So building materials and furnishings. We typically remodel buildings with the hopes of having a better indoor air environment, but what's actually the case is it can actually worsen indoor air quality up to several years after renovation or construction. And I have some data on this I'll show a little bit in the talk. And personal activities. Chlorinated water is actually a major source of chloroform, which I think is interesting. And of course, smoking cigarettes and eating and drinking are also sources of exposure. So what are these typical pollutants within the air? Here's an example of the typical pollutants. These are ones that we know about and that we study. And I imagine there's other classes of pollutants that we don't yet know about. I mean, a lot of these just emerged in recent years that we're starting to study. My talk is going to focus on VOCs, which stands for volatile organic compounds. It can be thought of as like a fume, so something you smell, or like an aroma, like chlorine. And what are the human health effects associated with these exposures? So there have been thousands of articles written in the literature looking at the links between exposures and health. And here's just an example. We typically focus on cancer as the main health effect from pollutants. But what's important to realize is that pollutants can cause a range of effects, not just mortality effects, but also morbidity effects that affect everyday well-being. And it's typical that you go through life, and if you get a headache, you think, oh, well, that's just life, or you take an aspirin or something, without realizing it may be something that you're being exposed to that may be affecting your health. As I say, headaches are not an aspirin deficiency or ibuprofen deficiency. There's often a reason for it. So when we say that most of our exposure occurs indoors, where does that come from? Well, we spend most of our time indoors, whether it's in a building or in a car, in public transport, for staying with children in daycare centers and schools. The levels of pollutants are usually several times to several hundred times higher indoors than outdoors. That's consequently, so most of our exposure occurs indoors. I'm going to present results now from a study that I just completed with one of my PhD students, Nigel Goodman. We sampled indoor air environments around the campus at the University of Melbourne. It was a great study. We found a lot of very interesting and surprising results, which I'll share with you for the first time tonight, or today. And what's important to realize, too, is that these pollutants are regulated outdoors, but they're not regulated at all indoors. Okay, so the data here, what IO means is indoor to outdoor ratio. So it's the ratio of concentrations of indoor pollutants to the outdoor pollutants. So it's how many times higher the indoor concentrations are than the outdoor concentrations. Now, as you can see, some of these are up to almost a couple of hundred times higher indoors than outdoors. And these chemicals here, they include the air toxics that are regulated outdoors but not indoors. They're linked with problems of cognitive function, respiratory difficulties, immune system function. And what's interesting is this was taken in a green building, one of the 6-star green buildings on campus. And I know there's a lot of data. As I mentioned, these slides will be available for anyone who would like them. Renovated offices. These were offices that were renovated a couple of years ago in the School of Engineering. And so most of, again, you can see the same phenomena. It's almost several hundred times higher. Most of the main sources here are from the carpetings, the manufactured wood products. Also, they did have a building that had nice open windows where they could do cross ventilation, but now the windows are closed. And I've talked with quite a few staff members in these buildings afterwards, and it's really, the stories are just, they break your heart. They say, since they renovated the building, we've had migraines, we can't breathe, and we can't complain because we're afraid to complain that we'll lose our jobs. And so that's why I feel that, I have to do this research to bring data to the situation. Kind of also tangential, I mentioned since I've started doing research on this topic, I've received more than 4,000 emails from people around the world. None of my other research in my whole career has ever gotten emails like that. So often I'm just like a graduate student wanting a copy of a paper, but this one I get emails from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from the US, it's saying, they tell me about their problem and they want to know, well, what have you found, what can you recommend? Student workplaces, I think these results are interesting too, because these chemicals are associated with impairment of cognitive ability and respiratory difficulties. Again, this is a place where in a university you should have indoor air environments that promote learning and thinking. And in toilets, the main source here were toilets that had air fresheners in them. We did not find these chemicals in the toilets that did not have air fresheners in them. So, you see these data and you think, we're in Australia, the best country in the world, which it is. Yeah, it is. It is.
No, don't tell me.
And in the healthiest country, how could this happen in our modern day? Well, that's when I started investigating it. I started doing a sleuth, looking at the laws. It turns out that indoor air quality is essentially unregulated, unmonitored indoors. We have no laws monitoring our indoor environment. Exceptions are things like chemistry laboratories. Those are very well monitored. The legislation talks about regulating ambient air, but ambient air is defined as outdoor air external to buildings. Emissions from these major sources like consumer products and building materials, those also are unregulated, unmonitored. So if the chemicals coming out of a smokestack or a tailpipe, it's regulated. If it's coming out of an air freshener or a laundry product or a building product, it's not regulated. Now you can imagine that these types of pollutants, if they affect health and productivity, they have economic implications as well. There was a study done back in 1998 by my colleague Steve Brown at CSIRO, showed that just looking at the cost on health and productivity, it would cost Australia $12 billion a year. This was a conservative estimate. This was just direct cost in the workplace. Now you think that if human labor is the most expensive part of the building, that making improvements in indoor air quality and thus productivity would then help the bottom line. What's interesting, there's often a focus on creating energy efficient buildings, making things very airtight for energy efficiency without realizing what the impact is on the humans. So there's been quite a number of indoor air quality studies done across the UK and in America and in the European Union and in Australia, and they've all come up with pretty much the same findings of what the highest concentration, most prevalent pollutants are. And these are the ones that always come up. So then my question was, what are the main sources of these pollutants? It turns out there's typically one main source, which are fragrance consumer products. So what is a fragrance consumer product? And this is actually a term that I coined. It's basically a consumer product with the addition of a fragrance on it. So we're not talking about things like our very aromatic natural sources like flowers or fruits or plants. But these are chemically formulated products. It's several thousand times less expensive to synthesize a fragrance and to add to a product than to use a natural source. For instance, the artificial or synthesized rose aroma can cost 1/4000th of what the actual rose oil would cost. And as you can imagine, they're in basically everything that we have in society. Fragrance doesn't necessarily in these products serve a hygienic function or a disinfecting function. It's basically for aesthetics that it's added. And Australians use or expose these products all the time. And I'm going to talk about results I made from the survey. But what's interesting is fragrances. Next slide. Fragrance is a single fragrance. Is actually a mixture of several dozens, several hundred chemicals, very complex formulations, and they're primarily synthesized from other chemicals. They're very chemically similar to flavors, so flavors that are added in food. I should also mention the term natural really has no meaning, or organic. So organic fragrance, natural fragrance, Instead of product, it basically is synthesized and has synthetic chemicals. Now, it may have some chemicals that are naturally derived, but not typically not. And I've been analyzing these chemical formulations in the last year with one of the PhD students. As also interesting is these formulations are confidential. There's no law anywhere in the world that requires that these flavors or fragrances disclose all their ingredients to the public. Now, do they, we find them in indoor air, they're pollutants. Is there any association with health effects? So I just have to find out, well, are people affected by these products, and if so, in what way? So I conducted a national epidemiological study of Australians. I also conducted the same study in Australia and in the UK and the European Union, and the results are surprisingly consistent. About a third of Australians report one or more type of adverse health effects when exposed to one or more types of these products. Among asthmatics, more than 50% of asthmatics have an asthma attack or some other type of adverse effect when exposed to these products. So breaking down these health effects, these are the ways that they came out. So most of the effects were respiratory, but a lot involving the brain and the immune system. And while right now I'm looking to try to figure out what's the underlying mechanism underlying this, it seems to be involving inflammation of some sort. My survey also asked some questions about the effects on everyday life, and these I thought were quite surprising. 7.7 Australians have lost one or more work days or an entire job because of one or more type of fragrance products in their workplace. And I'll give you an example. I get these calls all the time. There are two women who are working down the CBD, and they had asthma, but they couldn't be in their workplace because they had these automated air fresheners going all the time. And they were having constant asthma attacks. And the manager said, well, these are here to clean the air, and if you don't like it, too bad. And so I really tried to help them save their jobs by providing information, talking to the manager, saying, well, actually, these actually are linked with adverse health effects and maybe better for their employees if you didn't have them. But here are cases where they were about to lose their job because of a product. Another kind of interesting finding, a couple of them, is that if people are affected, they can't use public restrooms. So it's almost like if you have a wheelchair and you can't get into a public toilet because the doors are too small, it's the same thing. If you have asthma, you can't enter a public toilet because of the air pressure. Also, that another thing that they 10% will not wash their hands with soap in a public place if they think the soap is fragrant. Well, why not? Well, they wash their hands with it, and then the fragrance aroma gives them an asthma attack or causes dermatitis. Then they think, well, I'll just wash it after I leave after the toilet. That's another interesting finding. And overall, surveyed more than twice as many would prefer a fragrance-free environment. But I think it's interesting too because there's this movement towards scent branding of hotels and even airplanes. And one of my concerns is a concern because I get so many emails about it, or people go on a trip where they get into an airplane, say they have asthma, they get on the plane, and they can't breathe because they start venting these fragrance through the plane. But they're stuck and they can't get off the plane. Now, here's what became a chemical state. I'm trying to figure out, so what's in these products? Because fragrances are supposed to be pleasing. And I love the smell of roses and flowers and everything. But what is it with these products? What chemically is about them that could be associated with these adverse health effects? So what I did with my PhD students is we analyzed a range of fragrance consumer products, both ones called green, organic, natural, as well as regular ones, and looked at what was in them. So here's what we found. Among these 37 products, we looked at over 150 different types of VOCs, but collectively almost 560 different ingredients. About a fourth of them are classified as toxic or hazardous under one or more types of law, but they're not regulated in these products. They're regulated in other media. Interestingly, these toxic chemicals or hazardous chemicals, there is no real difference between the green products and the regular products. So I looked at people we're paying a lot of money for these products called green, organic, natural, but there's really no chemical difference in them. Now, here's part of the hidden hazard part is that fewer than 3% of all ingredients were disclosed anywhere to the public. It wasn't on the label, wasn't on the safety data sheet, wasn't on the website, and this is completely legal. So, what are the most common VOCs that were classified as toxic hazards along with the chemicals? But the ones with the asterisks are ones that are considered in other countries to have no safe exposure level. So even one molecule is considered unsafe. I'm going to look at two examples. One is an air freshener. It's very common around buildings. So what's on the label? No ingredients. And that's fine. That's legal. What's on the safety data sheet? Some very nice sounding things like essential oils, organic perfume, and no hazardous ingredients listed. But what was actually in it? These were just the ones that have the highest concentration. So these were not all the VOCs. There are probably over 100 VOCs. The ones in bold are ones that are classified as toxic or hazardous under federal laws. And some of these chemicals, I should say, like limonene, and I'll talk about this a little bit. Some of these chemicals actually combine with other chemicals in the air to generate even more hazardous pollutants. Like limonene has a lemon or orange scent. As soon as it hits the air, it reacts with ozone to generate formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a well-known toxic chemical, and ultrafine particles, which is linked with heart and lung disease. So you may have a bad actor, but if it gets a bad company, it becomes an even worse actor. But I was talking, this is one with a baby on the front. This is meant to be gentle and safe for babies. So to parents, so help your baby sleep at night. Here's the fabric softener. Again, very nice sounding ingredients. And here's what's actually in them. So chemicals with no safe exposure level. Chloromethane has actually been banned in the U.S., but it's in fabric softener. So I go back to the question, so why is this the confidence happen? I just finished a review, finished an article that's published in the University of New South Wales Law Journal with colleagues here at the law school, trying to figure out this patchwork quilt of laws and where the big holes are, and it really is the story of loopholes. So there are no requirement that your consumer products list any or all ingredients. If they do list any ingredients, as you typically see, they're the very benign and safe sounding ones rather than the hazardous sounding ones. So the question is having some information on the label more misleading than having no information? I mean, if you see no information, you think, well, there's got to be some chemicals in there. But if you see some information, you somehow think that's everything. Cosmetics, as well as foods and drugs, do need to list all ingredients. However, they don't need to list any ingredient in this mixture called fragrance or flavor. So you might actually have a product that has like natural flavor, natural fragrance, that actually has several hundred chemicals in it that are not disclosed. And this is true internationally, so these laws are consistent with the countries around the world, so it's not unique here. The question I often get is, well, okay, that's all fine and good. So you have toxic chemicals in the product. Does it really matter? They're at low levels. Actually, low levels do matter for several reasons. One is cumulative effects. We're not just exposed to one chemical one time for one product. We're exposed to these products regularly throughout our day, and these chemicals accumulate. And risks add up, and these chemicals stay in our body. Also, there's a problem with mixtures. So we may have two chemicals individually at low levels, but together in mixtures, they create something very hazardous. As an example, we're familiar with ammonia in bleach. So ammonia is somewhat hazardous, you wouldn't want to drink it, and same with bleach, white king. If you put them together, you get a chemical called chloramine, which can be instantly fatal. So there you have, you have things at low levels, but together can be very dangerous. The epidemiological evidence, I look at it this way. The typical approach to investigating indoor air quality problems or pollutant problems is, again, while they're low levels, they don't exceed any standards or thresholds, people should be safe. As we know, they're not regulated, so there aren't really any standards or thresholds for these. But I say, I listen to people and say, people are, for some reason, getting sick from these products. So why is this? I turn around the other way, the inverse question, and say, given the people when they're exposed that they have an asthma attack or migraine, what are they being exposed to that could be associated with these effects? And what's interesting, this final point, non-monotonic dose-response relationship, what that means is we typically think that the dose makes the poison. That is, a higher dose means a higher adverse response. Non-monotonic means lower is higher, or a lower level can have a more hazardous response. And I'll give you an example of this. Bisphenol A is very common in plastics. And here's a study that was done that shows that at higher levels there are no effects. So at lower levels, in males, it has decreased sperm count and damage to the prostate. So they're called endocrine disrupting chemicals. At lower levels can be more hazardous. Now what's happened interestingly with this case of plastics, they've started to replace it with bisphenol S or bisphenol F, which turns out to have even more of a pronounced non-monotonic dose-response relationship. So what I've seen with these products is they may take out something they've proven to be hazardous, they replace it with something else with unknown toxicities that turns out to be actually worse in the long run. Some of the challenges, and in my career, I've investigated now over 300 sick buildings to try to figure out, why are they sick? Why are people getting sick? And what can we do to remedy it? And it's challenging. It's not easy. Well, for first, there's usually not just one source or one effect. With cigarette smoking, it was actually pretty clear. There was sources, with cigarettes, and effects, which were lung disease or cancer. But in these, one source can cause a range of different effects in different people because of individual susceptibility. So a single, for instance, a piece of furniture that's off-gassing formaldehyde, it may cause a headache in one person, an asthma attack in another person, a rash in another person, gastrointestinal distress in another person. So again, one source can have a range of different effects in people. Also because we're dealing with chemical mixtures here, not just one chemical that we can trace. There's often a lag time too, is that people may be exposed to something and then the effects occur days later, weeks later, months later, years later. So it's really difficult to associate the cause and the effect. Again, with the low cumulative hazards, that increased exposure can lead to the increased risk. And people are different. Everybody's different. Not everybody will get immediately unwell in an environment. Some people have different susceptibilities. So this is just published a paper on this. It was really interesting. So there's been this whole movement towards having green buildings, and green buildings promote healthful indoor air quality and thereby human health. What I found is not necessarily. So the whole green building movement has been focused more on energy efficient and occupant health. Internationally, fewer than 7.5% of the points in the green building schemes are associated with indoor air quality. And in Australia, it's fewer than 6%. Interestingly, some green products and green practices can actually worsen indoor air quality. The example I previously mentioned was tightening up the buildings, because if you tighten up the buildings and make things very energy efficient and close the windows, you concentrate the pollutants indoors, so it's very difficult to ventilate the indoor environment. Also, some green products that use recycled materials have hazardous chemicals used in the recycling, and then this outcast to the occupants. Two green products. One called green, natural, organic. Are they better for indoor air quality and health? Again, not necessarily. So in my study of green products, I've now looked at green building products as well. It's the same story. One is called green, organic, natural, have the same types of emissions as the regular chemicals. Of course, there are exceptions, but this is in general the set of products that I've analyzed. The green criteria don't really have health-based criteria. Or they measure the type of pollutants that they can measure, not necessarily the ones that can really affect health. Because measuring these pollutants is very difficult and expensive. It costs about $1,000 a sample to analyze a consumer product. So it's not something you can just buy a meter or buy a sensor and go into a room and measure things. It's a very complicated technology right now. Then there's a real problem with greenwashing in Australia. There's 866 products and nearly 2,000 claims of green. Fewer than 1% of products have any data or substantiation for their green claims. I'll read a little story here. I've been I got these results about these products after I analyzed them, and I called up the companies. I didn't want to blindside them, and I said, here's what I found in your product. Can you explain this? And they would say, well, we can assure you our product is safe. I said, well, I found these hazardous chemicals in your baby shampoo. Actually, baby shampoo has some of the worst chemicals in it. And they come back and say, well, we can assure you your product is safe. And it goes back and forth. Whatever question I ask, they don't say that my data are wrong, but they just come back saying that we can assure you our product is safe. So they will never release any. So can you tell us what kind of testing you did to test for safety? We can assure you our product is safe. So it's almost like a broken record. Whenever you ask them, you just say safe. Yeah. I also, in my studies, I never disclosed any brand names. And I did that for a reason. One, it wasn't necessary for the scientific purposes of the study. But another reason is, you don't want the companies to come after you and say, you don't want to say a certain internationally famous baby shampoo is toxic. So, a question I forget, so, I'm trying to instill hope here, okay? But we'll get to the hopeful part in a minute. So how do you choose a safe product? The typical heuristics people may use are not necessarily reliable. So the first one, number of ingredients. Let's just say that all products listed all ingredients. So you have 100 chemicals listed on the label or on a website. So how do you compare them? Well, you can't really just count ingredients because that doesn't tell you anything about toxicity. You can have some very harmless ingredients. You also can't look at necessarily individual chemicals. When I provided these lists of chemicals in products, I looked at their individual toxicity, but that doesn't tell you anything about how they act in mixtures. We have virtually no information on the toxicity of mixtures of chemicals. It's very difficult because you can imagine all the different combinations you have of different chemicals. You also can't rely on concentrations because, again, it depends on how these individual concentrations come together, but also because lower levels can actually be more hazardous than higher levels for some chemicals. We can't rely on what's on the label. We can't rely on these green claims. Product reading guides, there's a couple of companies out there that have like a guide to green cleaning products or a guide to safer products. But they didn't actually analyze the products. They're providing their ratings just based on what's disclosed on the label. And fewer than 2% of ingredients are disclosed on the label, and they don't disclose all the hazardous ones. So I really worry about that. I've talked with the CEOs of these companies and saying, this is really misleading information, but they just keep doing what they're doing. These are not Australian companies, by the way, they're international companies. But I have a partnership now with Choice. So first I'm doing is I'm analyzing products. I'm going to give the information to Choice, and Choice is going to be able to publicly distribute it. Well, it's congratulations to Choice. I mean, Choice is great because they're going to name brand names too. So we're going to name brand names and list ingredients. So what about fragrance-free products? Well, you reduce the problem with the fragrance. For whatever reason, these fragrance molecules may be problematic, and that's my next slide. But fragrance-free doesn't necessarily mean non-toxic because you have the product base and you have an added fragrance to it. So you might still have, say, a cleaning product that has potentially hazardous chemicals in it, even though you don't have the fragrance in it. All that said, there is really a movement towards fragrance-free products because for whatever reason, the fragrances tend to be particularly problematic. A question I also get is, well, what about essential oils? Another big movement towards essential oils. Well, I've just finished analyzing essential oils, and one of my PhD students is analyzing a range of essential oils. The problem with them is they're not necessarily essential. They're typically, what happens is they're typically extracted with petrochemicals, and not just mild, but things like benzene or toluene or methanol or ethanol. They're really hazardous solvents, and they're often diluted with solvents. So you don't have just the pure essence of the essential oil. You have petrochemicals involved. It's also very difficult to make pure essential oils. My PhD student was working on this. We bought, now with the Queen Vic Market, we bought hundreds of oranges and she's distilling them. It's really hard. And the hundreds of oranges just came up like this amount of essential oil. So you can see that it's not really cost effective. to try to do things all naturally. So I understand the economics and be much less expensive to synthesize them or to dilute them with solvents. So then I was trying to figure out, so what's the main chemical difference between these fragrance products, which seem to have these effects, and the fragrance-free versions? So back to the laboratory, I look at what's the main difference between them? It's a class of chemicals called chiralterpenes, like limonene, which is the familiar orange lemon smell, alpha-pinene, beta-pinene, which smells like pine needles. Now, these chemicals are at the same concentration in consumer products as they typically are from oranges or lemons. So it's not the case of, well, there's just some higher concentrations in consumer products. Not really. It's the same concentration, but why is an orange not causing asthma attack, but something that's a limonene from a consumer product, or that's just from the chemical itself, from a laboratory, have the effect? So I'm trying to figure this out. And one of the clues I've come up with deals with chirality. So chiral is a Greek word that means hand. And some molecules have two different hands, a right hand and a left hand. An example of this was the drug thalidomide, and that may be familiar to you. Well, thalidomide was marketed as a sedative. One of the chiral enantiomers or molecules was a sedative, but the other caused birth defects. And they didn't find this out until it was distributed. And that's why pharmaceuticals now have very strict requirements on demonstrating purity. So they just can't, when they synthesize a molecule, you typically get both hands. The pharmaceutical industry, when you have to purify it, so just use one enantiomer, each hand's called an enantiomer, or the other. But where you have these very strict regulations on pharmaceuticals, there are no regulations at all like this for consumer products or for foods. So that might be part of the solution. So I'm looking at right now is, what's the difference in the chiral structure between the limonene that's used in a cleaning product and the limonene from an orange or a lemon at the same concentrations? And see, is there any difference in effects? So that's what I'm looking at right now. So is there a difference between the natural and synthetic form of the same compound? And I'm doing toxicity testing to try to see is there any kind of difference. Exposure reduction studies, I'm working with a group of students on this, saying if we switch products, how much can we improve the indoor air quality just by doing simple things like switching cleaning supplies or personal care products? Understandably, it's more difficult once you have a building renovated and you've got carpeted, you're not going to want to have to take the carpet out and put in tile or something, but I'm looking at other things and just switching products, how much of an improvement can you make? Also look at sensors. I'm working with College of Electrical Engineering. Wouldn't it be great if we had a cell phone app that we could go around and measure pollutants indoors? Now, I mentioned it's very difficult technically to measure at the kind of accuracy needed because these are often the parts per billion level indoors. But still, I have faith in our electrical engineers that we can figure out a way to do this. I'm looking at ways to test products and provide some sort of evaluation criteria for the public. So how do we make sense of these 100 chemicals or so that's in a product to understand what is a safe product? And looking at the effects on environmental systems. So these chemicals don't only get into the air, but they go down our drain and into the water supply system, and they affect aquatic life. So it's like household hazardous waste going down the drain, again, unregulated. And what kind of effects is it having on fish and marine life? Now here's some solutions. The good news is that the solutions are relatively simple. It's things that we've used for hundreds, if not thousands of years before. This is recently a modern phenomenon in our generation. So I have an adage with cleaning that if you can't drink it or you can't eat it, don't clean with it because eventually it's going to get into your body. So vinegar, bicarb, cutting a lemon, so not lemon juice constituted or not a lemon scented product, but just cutting a lemon using lemon rind, plain water. They make great cleaners. The concern I always say, well, what about killing bacteria, disinfecting? Vinegar is a great disinfectant. And actually, you think about hand washing and what kills or gets rid of the germs, is friction in water is one of the most effective ways to get rid of bacteria and viruses. I had a great comment from Professor Roger Vanderham, who was former chief scientist for Australia. He was a chemical engineer. He said the best we should about is friction, just running it underneath water and going like this, and some soap is fine. For everyday use, now, if you're a heart surgeon, yes, you're going to want to have to disinfect everything. I was just saying, for day-to-day use, You don't need the very heavy antiseptics. Interiors, again, very simple products. Tile, concrete, brick, metal, real hardwood. A lot of these manufactured wood products that look like hardwood, they already have a lot of formaldehyde in them because they're manufactured with urea formaldehyde resins. And they can off-gas formaldehyde for years afterwards, and as evidence in the green building. As household displays, you can think about inert materials, straying away from plastics, switching types of products. So basically, the approach is to think about the sources and reduce or eliminate them. Some are easier to change out than others. Many people to thank, my colleagues and my students. Really want to thank Dr. Carrie Bennett in Graduate House. I mean, I will tell you today, if you want to talk about the model of a healthy, happy indoor environment, it's Graduate House. And that's why I live here. Dr. Bennett is wonderful, and this is really the model. So everything she said out here. I have a website with all of my publications, all my data on my website, all free of charge. Thank you very much.